still covering a subject that we've entitled The Journey of Life. It dovetails quite well with our emphasis this year, trying to understand more and more this trip from earth to heaven. And we're all on that journey, and quite a few passages in the Bible talk about that. What really impresses me is how much of Old Testament truth, and then referring back to that New Testament truth, is lined up and ordered in such a way that we're always drawn to the wilderness wanderings, the route of the Exodus, the crossing of the Jordan and taking the promised land. It's all considered to be a journey, a trip, a way, a path, a road. And the likeness of that in a metaphoric and spiritual sense is very, very clear through the Bible, because we too are on a journey. And then, a matter of fact, when we take that primary Old Testament word, the word derek, or way, path, road, it is used as much or more in a metaphoric spiritual sense than it is in a physical sense to identify some map route. So let's have a word of prayer, and we'll come back into Proverbs and cover a little bit more. Father, do bless our time together. Thank you not only that we are on this journey and we know the destination, it is very appropriate and very appealing to us that someday we'll all be gathered together in the presence of the Lord, the one who saved us, redeemed us, and who calls us to join him in heaven, but that you are with us on this journey as well. Your personal presence and the spiritual capacity and power is all available to us as we believe and trust you along life's road. Bless then our time together in this class, our other classes, and in fact where people are gathered this Lord's Day all around the world. Lend your blessing and be present with us, we ask. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I want to just quickly touch where we've been and what we're doing, and today amplify a little bit more. We're going to dip outside of the book of Proverbs a little more today because I want to now begin to expand our coverage of some of the key concepts. We've been dealing with three terms that are found through the book of Proverbs, and they overlap quite a bit. They're often found in tandem when you have Hebrew parallelism. You can have guard the way of your heart, stabilize the path of your life, way, path, and you have that kind of parallelism all the time. Now, what that doesn't do is equate the two in exactness to where there's no such thing as verbal inspiration, because every word retains its own independent meaning. And yet there clearly is great overlap, and to what degree will depend upon the original definition of the word, how it can be used, and the closeness of proximity in the passage in which it's found. But one will shed light on the other, and conversely as well. So I want to make sure that we're covering those things, and I think that you'll enjoy some of the things we share together here today. We did use Proverbs 2 and also Proverbs 4. And we made a couple of points here in doing that. One is that we have repetition, and yet in the repetition we also acknowledge that maybe not in this passage, but through Proverbs, you may have the English translation of way or path or tracks, and that might represent the same Hebrew word, or it might be different words. In another passage, that word, which represented a certain Hebrew word here, but now you have the word path or way in a different verse, elsewhere in Proverbs or in the Bible, it actually represents a different Hebrew word. So editors have that right because they're trying to find the best match and the best expression in any given passage that will take in the context. That doesn't mean it's infallible. This is not inspiration that they're practicing. It's actually a commentary. It's their take on what word in English fits a certain Hebrew word or a Greek word, New Testament, in a certain context. But this passage in Proverbs 2, there are a number of other things there too, but the other passage where we entered quite carefully was Proverbs chapter 4. And the first number of verses dealing with sound teaching, understanding, instruction, wisdom, words, all of that are given to us as a context. It's a goal. It's the high point of Proverbs, to achieve wisdom, find wisdom, God's wisdom. But now in developing that, we notice that the acquisition of this wisdom and understanding and discernment, those are the three key words: wisdom, understanding, discernment. Those are the three primary trio of words in Proverbs that are talking about aspects of the same thing. The pinnacle is the wisdom. But the acquisition of all that involves a path, a way, and then not stumbling, and also put away from you all of this, and watch where you're going. Watch your step, because a misstep could be fatal to you spiritually, because you could deviate from the Lord. You could get off track and be headed down a very wrong road. And the neighborhood is not good, and where it will take you, and new things that enter your life into which you subscribe, and you never would have thought you'd find yourself in that situation, but you took a wrong turn. And so be careful. Look directly ahead. Don't let your gaze be fixed straight ahead. Watch the path. And if you do that, don't turn to the right or to the left. And if you come to an intersection, whatever you do, turn your foot away from the evil. So if you look this way and it looks enticing and appealing, and yet you know that's not where God would have you, turn away quickly. Leave it. So always stay on the right path. So all of this, and so our focus here is on these terms for path and way and so on. Now, I wanted to remind you that in the course of this, there are actually three different aspects or points of view, any or all of which may show up in every context where we're finding way, path, course, steps, journey, and so on. Three things. Number one is the definition of the word. And so we have taken some time, and I will be reviewing that for you and going into more detail in the primary term, derek, way or path, talking about exactly what is involved in that word, its background, its use, the nuances, and what context that can occur. We'll be spending more time in that. And then not only the definition, but we also have at the far end of it the destination. So not every verse in Proverbs that uses way, path, journey, course, trail, road, whatever word might be there, and whichever Hebrew word it means, but any of these primary words, and there are some sub-words that are all connected to our journey as well. But not only the definition of the word being important to us, and for that we look to Hebrew lexicons. That's another word for a dictionary. And using a multitude of dictionaries. So I would routinely check up to a dozen different dictionaries. And some of them are very profound, some of them are condensed to give you a quick bird's eye glimpse of it. But the more you dig, the more you understand the word, the more you find. But to check with various different sources, what do they believe this word means? And where did it come from? What are some other terms I have used as an example before? You can take the word base, B-A-S-E, base, and you know that's a stem or a root. It's not technically a root, but it is a root which can be found in a lot of different forms. Basic, basically, basement, baseball, you see? But they all have something in common. They all come from the same source. So you can grow different words by using a different prefix, suffix, compound it with another whole word, but understanding what's it about is really key. There is not a lot of work done on this anymore. In fact, the prevailing view, and I've shared this with you before, and I take exception to it, but I'm in a vast minority, is that words have meaning. There is a root meaning to words. They came from somewhere. The morphemes, the phonemes, the very basic sounds. And when you get down on that level, that's all hypothetical and theoretical, and yet it's real. So there are sounds that when coupled in the right context or with the right root, it actually communicates a meaning, a thought, a sound. There is something to that. But when we talk about these words, we're after definition. Now, at the far end, within these contexts of different verbs in Proverbs, different verses, we're going to find the destination. So now we're looking at some verses that say, don't go down this path, it will lead you to destruction. Okay, so you can begin now to assemble a far look that what road you're on, and this applies to life, is going to take you somewhere. And it's kind of nice to meander once in a while. We call that a Sunday afternoon drive. I don't think people do that too much anymore. But back in the old days, folks were just sort of glad that they had an automobile. And a Sunday afternoon drive was just a luxurious thing to look around and see the neighborhood or drive to the next town. It was just to meander and look around. But you don't live your life that way. You're not just wandering around in life with no sense of what you're doing, what your purpose is. Well, I'm saying it in kind of a way that you would be thinking, okay, well, if I am, I better stop. But we're going somewhere. And these roads and paths and ways within a number of the verses here are complete, along with this will be the end result if you go down that path. So we've got both positive and negative. Now, in between the definition, that is your starting point, your essential meaning to each of these words that have to do with a road or a path or a trail or an avenue or a boulevard or a highway, in addition to the word itself, where it comes from and where it leans, what nuances are contained, and in addition to the far end, which is the destination, we now are looking within all the contexts and verses, and we're finding out a lot of details and descriptions of what that road is like. It could be twisted. There may be accomplices. There are associates there. And that's why if you go down this road, you're making a mistake. You need not hang around the evil man, the evil people. They will certainly distort your conscience and your sense of right and wrong. So beware your travel companions. All those are the details that fill in all the cracks. So by the time we're done, we know what the word is trying to tell us. We know what the destination of the way of life is. And then the details and descriptions. It is the living way, or it's a dark path, or it's one where you will stumble because you can't see, and it's filled with impediments, and you're just walking around bumping into things. And so all the detail work. So now I want to go back to Derek, the first word, and not the Old Testament, but Proverbs contains 75 different uses of this. And so you can see this would be the lead word. It's the most common word whenever we communicate and talk. If you want to be effective, whether you're a journalist, a speaker, you would wish to use the most carefully chosen word in any context. And also, for the sake of variety, you don't just keep saying the same thing again and again and again. And so he goes, and then he goes, and then he goes, and then he goes. So how about, and so he traveled, and he journeyed, and he went, and he crossed over. So there are a lot of words that would be very adequate and exact where you want it. But you don't just say, Derek, the way, Derek, because you have other words. That third one, far less frequently. We've already talked about that. I'll review that later on, probably next week. But 19 times we have the word orach, which is a way or a path. Every one of those words is a little different. So keeping in mind that as we travel through the book of Proverbs, we're looking for words that are defined, and then they're described, and then they're destined. The word for Derek now actually has as its basic concept the D-R-K, and you understand that is the triliteral is the foundation of all the Semitic languages. So you have 3 letters, and you have vowel sounds in between. but you have D-R-K. And so the E sound, or the shava sound, which would be kind of a half E vowel sound, but you have different vowels, or you have an A sound or an O sound, as in orach. There's an O sound, and there's an A sound. But the aleph is actually a guttural consonant that's nearly silent, and then the R, and then the he at the end. But you have three letters in almost all of the basic vocabulary words. So Derek, now what is that about? So I want to take you to a number of contexts and help you to see some of the nuances there, which I think you'll find quite interesting. At least I do, and so you're obligated. You have to say, wow, this is really interesting. But this is the background and the use of words in the Bible. The whole concept of this term has to do with setting foot on a territory. And so walking, treading, marching, there are a number of different concepts that all fit in very well, but the basic idea is movement and treading upon something. So in what sense? So let me just show you a little bit. Look please in Deuteronomy chapter 1. This would be, I think, a near perfect example of how this is applied, and you begin to say, oh, okay, that gives it kind of a colorful sense, and I believe I get it. And it just really grows from there, but in Deuteronomy chapter 1 and in verse 36. Now, remember, starting in verse 34, what's happening here is the Lord heard the sound of your words, and he was angry and took an oath, saying, not one of these men, this evil generation, shall see the good land which I swore to give to your fathers, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. He shall see it, and to him and to his sons I will give the land on which he has set foot. You know, this is a very familiar idiom that's now seized in the promissory material of the Pentateuch. When you come to the promised land, this is how it's going to work. I'm going to give you the land. And now a little more detail. I'm going to give you every place where the sole of your foot steps. And so the boundaries and the square footage and the acreage will be contained within, so you are going to walk around and claim it. Did you know that the story of the heritage of Persephone Baptist Church goes back to Pastor Jack Keep? And when he was here, they met as a small group in a garage, and they met there for some period of time. And then when the church began to grow and members were added, being baptized, and they were outgrowing being in a house, and so they needed new quarters. So in shopping around, they found this property right here where the church building now sits. And Pastor Keep, literally, metaphorically, using the story of Israel claiming the promised land, he walked around the perimeter of the acreage that was here and dedicated to the Lord that if God would provide this land, that this would be the house of God in Persephone. And so using this right here, it was everywhere the sole of your foot touches, it's yours. And so there's a sense of dominating, claiming, having victory that's actually all contained in the word for Derek. Now, that could be victory of the enemies. It could be victory of us as believers in walking with the Lord. But it's the walking around. Now, the term walking around and treading also is going to apply in another idiom to marching, because the very act of marching, stomping, and now we take this word, put it into a wine vat, a wine press where the grapes are put. You're going to crush the grapes. So there are a number of passages that now begin to show up. Treading grapes 8 times in the prophetic books and a little bit beyond there as well. Look please in Amos chapter 9. Amos chapter 9. And I want to read for you there verse 13. Behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when the plowman will overtake the reaper and the treader of grapes. This is the person who walks, the form of Derek. The walker, the treader of grapes, him who sows seeds. When the mountains will drip sweet wine and all the hills will be dissolved. Do you understand? This is a time of conquest, of ultimate victory. And so the treading of the grapes is when you have mastered those grapes and claimed the grape juice, the sweetness of that. When you have crushed the grapes and you own it, these are yours, and you have the produce from it. And the marching and the conquering are all very fitting uses of this word, which is a simple word, the way, the path, the road, and it's walking, stomping, treading. How about that? This can be a time of joy, and this passage prophetically is. It is also used a number of times when it is not so much joy, but it is defeat. Those being trampled. Look in Isaiah chapter 63. Isaiah, the 63rd chapter. We're getting down very near the end of the book when you come there, but Isaiah 63, verses 2 and 3. I read that for you here. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? I have trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath. And of course, we have great southern song, mine eyes have seen the glory of the Lord. He is trampling out the vintage of where the grapes of wrath are stored. And it's judgment. It's victory by God, but that requires the defeat of the enemy. So to stomp, to conquer, to stand on top of, to dominate, to win, that's all here. So this road traveled where you find Derek as the way, the path. It's more than just a trail or road or path. It's marching or it's trampling. It's used particularly, in fact, the very background, the essential background of this maybe comes from a heifer or a cow that has walked. And if you have been out in a field where a farmer has pastured his livestock, you'll find that there are certain paths that all lead back to the barn. Because once the cows are out there and they're finished and they're called in, or they know it's time to come back in for milking, and so they all get on that path. They all move in and they get on that path because it's beaten down. It's been trampled. It's the routine. It's the custom. And so you also have this word used in tradition and custom and the way it's done and the circuitry of this is our movement. This is where we travel. This is what we do. And so it now is a fitting term for your customary way of life. How you do things, how you travel, how you conduct yourself, all these different ideas, and it all comes from the same essential meaning. But here's another interesting aspect of how this is used, another idiom, to bend the bow. Look, please, in Jeremiah chapter 50. Actually, let's go to Isaiah 5. We're right here in Isaiah. Isaiah 5, I have usually half a dozen to a dozen verses, even we're working outside of Proverbs right now, but in Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 28. Verse 28 of Isaiah 5. Its arrows are sharp, and all its bows are bent. What in the world does that have to do with Derek? It's when you step on the bow and you crush the bow to string it. You know, you have to get the curvature in the bow if you're going to put the string on. I remember taking archery, target archery, back in college years and years ago. And we were shooting distance archery at targets, some of them 100 yards away. At compound bows then. The recurve bow won't reach that far. But you always have to put your bow together. Now, compound bows will hold their shape longer because of the way they're manufactured. But a recurve bow, just a traditional bow, you, at the end of its use, or again before you're going to use a bow, you have to string it. You take the string off to release the tension. Otherwise, the curvature begins to lose something of its recoil and forcible exit of the arrow. So you take the string off. But if you're going to use it, you put the string on. And when you're putting the string on in Old Testament literature, generally speaking, what are you doing? You are preparing for war. And so to bend the bow, to step on this and help to push down the curvature of the bow so you can put the string on and then release it. You put it down just a little looser than is necessary so you can get the tied end up over that end of the bow. But that's actually this word for derrick. Now, do you see how interesting words can be? Because mastering the bow, bending the bow, is a signature for getting ready for war. And so to bend the bow means get ready to fight. So they're planning to win, domineering victory. And so this word has that very much in its background. So trampling, bending the bow, treading upon the high places of the earth. Look in Deuteronomy 33. Way back to Deuteronomy again. And another similar but dissimilar use of this idea of treading or walking. And that would be the verbal form, and again the noun form is the way, the path. But in Deuteronomy chapter 33, I'm reading verse 29. Again, this is God in a predictive sense, verse 29. Blessed are you, O Israel, who is like you, a people saved by the Lord, who is the shield of your help and the sword of your majesty. So your enemies will cringe before you, and you will tread upon their high places. All right, let's just start with the high places. What are the high places? In the Old Testament, they are the hilltops on which are the altars where they will worship Baal, Ashtoreth. They'll worship their gods. The high places represent the dominion of the God, and this is his territory, and he looks out over all the land, and he rules. But now God is saying, yes, and when you come into the promised land, you will tread on their high places. You will mash it down. You will stomp all over it. You will knock it over and destroy it and conquer it. That's what this means. And the word to tread upon is this word. So the verbal form of walk, way, journey, is more than just a casual meandering, a hike on some trail. This is purposeful, it's domineering, it is customary, it becomes the new norm. And so you're going to win and you're going to take over. So all of that in connection with this particular term. So the idea of trampling, look at a couple of passages that specify a particular road. And we could probably assign a meaning. Look in Genesis 3. And here again we have this word for derrick or way, the path, the trail, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 24. This is following the sin of Adam and the transgression of Eve, her being fooled. So in verse 24, because of that sin, in verse 23, the Lord God sent him out from the Garden of Eden. In verse 24, so he drove the man out. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword, which turned every direction to guard the way, that's this word, to the tree of life. So if there was a sign or a poster, this would be the road of the tree of life, or the path to the tree of life. This was the garden, which would seal a permanent and irreversible fate for Adam and Eve. And God, in his mercy, would not let them go back and now eat of that which would sustain physical life and spiritual condition forever. And God said, you may not go back in that garden now. You will not follow this path back to the tree of life. You've already eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and look at what's happened. And so you are exiled out of the garden, and he stationed cherubim to prevent Adam and Eve from going back to now partake of the tree of life, which was accessible to them before. But once they had the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, don't take another bite of the tree of life. Now, that itself, and this is just kind of a sidebar, the study of the tree of life is a fascinating study. It was a literal tree, and it did bear fruit. And whether or not it was the physicality of that fruit and the nutrient quality that sustained life so long as one was partaking of that, that's an interesting discussion, but the spiritual ramifications are far more important. It's what it represented, that God was sustaining their life, and the eating of this was their fellowship with God in partaking of this. But that whole symbolic and yet very real implication of the tree of life is not just for the Garden of Eden. It also carries into Revelation, where we will all eat of the tree of life. There it is. And not only that, if you want fun, go through Proverbs and find the tree of life. And beyond that, find the whole essence of life itself, and experiencing that life in its fullness as we walk this journey of life hand in hand with God. And the numeric passages in Proverbs that talk about the difference between the way of life and the way of death are certainly capitalizing on the imagery of that tree of life that's the destination up here, and which God forbid Adam and Eve from going down that path now in their fallen, sinful, doomed existence. They were not allowed to go back and eat because of the grace of God. But God would find a way for them to be restored, and then he would invite them, come and fellowship with me. And so this is the way to life, but not until we understand Christ.
So I know that, God cast us out, and after that, we died. So do we need the tree of life to live forever? If Adam and Eve never sinned, was that tree sustaining them? Which I don't know if anyone has the answer to that question, but it's just an interesting thought because they had to do that. And,
Yeah.
and it says it in Revelations too, we'll eat off the tree of life.
That's right. That's right. Okay, John, go ahead. No, actually, what you brought up, I'm sorry, I meant to say Bruce. That's what's hard to tell, whether God has combined and networked and intertwined physical food. But in Revelation, the answer to that is, well, obviously there is great truth in that. Because in fact, in the millennial reign of Christ, and that is also forecast within Revelation, there are medical needs. And the answer to the medical needs are from the plants and the leaves and the trees and the fruit. And that's not just symbolic or representative. It actually, and there are many of us who do believe that there is a lot of efficacy and healing. I don't mean supernatural, but I mean therapeutic remedy and help in the very plants and the fruits and the foods and the minerals and the products that God put here on earth. By the way, the Jewish people actually held a position that was very much traditional for them all through the centuries, that in the created earth with all of what it has, there is a corresponding solution to every ailment that man faces. If you could find the nutrient or the herbal presence or the therapeutic value of this or this or this or this and line it up, and you know that over the years, decades, centuries, a lot of people have really tapped into that. I wouldn't say that anyone has a corner on that, but in India, Native Americans here, and really in all countries before modern pharmaceuticals, that's what they used.
It was early in the last century, actually, that it started to have pharmaceuticals. Up to that, it was all natural.
So I shouldn't go down this rabbit hole, but did you realize that back in the 1800s, there was a practice known as homeopathy, and that has been so ostracized and misinformation spread by modern American Medical Association, AMA, and by all those whose careers, therapeutics, pharmaceuticals were in jeopardy. But back in that time period, 3 out of every 5 doctors in the early 1800s was also a homeopathic doctor, schooled in the traditional medicine. But remember, the traditional medicine of that day consisted of bloodletting, purging, so they would induce vomiting, they would cut, and hopefully they stop the bleeding when they say all the bad blood is out, but before all the blood is out. And every once in a while, you know, they say, oh, if he could have just hung in there another couple of hours, but he's gone, he's passed now. But if he'd hung on there, we had him almost cured.
I think that's how George Washington died.
Yeah. But 3 out of 5 were also homeopathic doctors. Did you know that? Benjamin Rush Hospital in Philadelphia was homeopathic. Until they formed the American Association of Medical Practitioners, because they were losing all their patients to homeopathic doctors. And the barbaric means of the traditional medicine. No, I don't want to make comparisons with today. No, I don't. No, never mind. I won't go there. But there was efficacy in so much of what God created. And you know that's true in nearly every people group all around the world. But that has been so overtaken and so overshadowed. And now, of course, what you have is traditional medicine, which will castigate anything that is an alternative to what anyone else would propose. So few people ever find out about this, but it is valid. Also, when people left on a covered wagon to travel west, this is the mid-1800s, early to mid-1800s, and they're traveling out, and where they're going, there is no MD. So do you know what went with virtually every covered wagon traveling west? It was a little kit of homeopathic remedies and a book by Dr. Herring. And I've read that book. I've seen that book. It's Materia Medica and amazing. And they were their own doctors. And they had a kit of about 35 basic homeopathic remedies. And that's how they treated themselves until, you know, they would settle in a valley and more travelers would come and pioneers moved out and begin to grow. And then they could establish a clinic or a doctor. And there are surely very efficacious things that have been discovered in modern medicine too, no question about it. But the sad thing is when they ridicule and they cancel out anything other than their own voice. And I'm not sure what to say without going too far, but is that what's happened here recently? There is no other, we will not sanction, you're not allowed to have this, you can't, and Well, at any rate, to tread and trample. So in Genesis 3, we've got the way to the tree of life. It is blocked. Because of time here, I think I'll just summarize part of it. In Genesis 16:7, Hagar was on the road to Shur, and an angel met her there, the road to Shur. New Testament, Paul was on the road to Damascus. So there are roads, highways, trails, paths that are actually named because of the destination. So in Proverbs, we have the road or the way of darkness or the way of life, because of the of life or of darkness can be characteristic of the journey. It can also be the end point as well. And so the road of darkness or the way of darkness is both the pit at the end, but even more so and more immediately, it is you're walking in darkness. How do you even know where you're going? And it characterizes being on the wrong path. And so that's the warning that God gives. It can be a major highway. The King's Highway was an official name for the Trans-Jordan Road. It ran north-south. It's found in Numbers 20, verse 17, Numbers 21, verse 22. And so that's an interior route that ran north-south, the other side of the Jordan. And once you cross over there, head straight north, and it takes you into the upper territory of Israel and beyond. Along the coastline, running from Egypt all the way up to Philistine territory, is the Road of the Sea, the Way of the Sea. It's also called the Via Maris, via or alongside maris, that's the water, so the road of the sea. So we have a number of roads that are actually officially designated, and any map drawn would show that, and everybody knew that route, and it was well beaten down, well traveled. It became the trade routes of the caravans of camels taking all kinds of goods and wares in both directions and trading up here and bringing their wares down here, and they marketed that. That's what they did for a living. But having an official name for a road was very common practice. But also descriptive name is what we're finding, especially here in Proverbs. The term derek also is quite inclined to speak of a longer journey. It's not just, a trip. We're going to have a trip to church today. So we live just over half a mile. It's not really a trip. Sometimes I walk it, but it's just from there to here. But if you're going to travel for quite a ways, and so we do find this Joseph preparing supplies to go for his father's journey to Egypt. Remember the Gibeonites in the book of Joshua? They tricked Joshua and the Israelites as though they had completed a very long journey, and they brought moldy bread, and they convinced Joshua, nothing here, nothing here. We just travel a long ways, and we just want you to sign this little treaty with us that you will not destroy us. And we come from a long ways. We're really tired, and we just want peace with you. And so if you just sign in, what a mistake that was, because they were neighbors among those that God said, you will utterly destroy those people. They're wicked, they're vile, they're liars, they're treacherous, and they fooled Joshua and company. And it wasn't a journey. It just came from nearby. So quite often, derek refers to a journey from a distant place. Elijah, remember when he mocked the prophets of Baal? And he was laughing and taunting, and one of the things he said, maybe your God Baal, maybe he's away on a journey. And so he's gone into another country, he won't be back for some time. That's why he can't hear you, he's just too far away. So derek often is apropos to our description and understanding of our life's journey. It's not in this respect, it's not a wind sprint. It's not a 50-yard dash. It's a long marathon. It's a longer trip. So among what we're trying to accomplish in our hearts and lives to make you think this way, realize that you and I may follow different little bits of trails, but the direction where we're going, it's all the same, from here to the presence of God. And our understanding what this journey is like, with the pitfalls, with the impediments, with the distractions, with the allurements that would get us off the path, would destroy our life. Don't turn to the right and don't turn to the left. And yet there is also the aspect of multiplicity, that there are a number of things. When you follow GPS, sometimes it will tell you when you come 3.2 miles, stay straight onto, and it will give you a name. I must have to turn off this road. But when you get there, you find out, oh no, the name by which you know it here ends. And it's the same road, but it just goes right on through it. Now it has a new name. So don't be looking on the signpost for the name of the road that you just were on. It's now called. But if you wanted to name the whole highway, it might be Route 24. Or it might have a longer term name. It might be Transcontinental Highway. But it's going to have route this, or known as the King's Road here, and known as Bethel Avenue here. But it's all actually the same road. So we also know that. So now I'm summarizing that you're going to find not totally evenly, but really widely disseminated. You're going to have path and paths, way and ways. So in what sense is it multiplied? What do you mean the ways? The way of God, but then there are the ways of God. Because there are multiple aspects of this, not contradictory, and all going the same place in the same direction. So now when I talk about the will of God for you and the will of God for me, there are things about God's will that are standard for each of us, all of us together. There's no difference. I refer often to 1 Thessalonians 5:18, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. And so I would say, well, that works for you. That's God's will for you. But for me, he allows me to complain. I have good reasons to complain. And so I don't have to be in everything give thanks. That's God's will for you. But you see, there are aspects to the will of God that are standard and unchangeable for every one of us because we're his children. But the will of God as well, in a practical and applied sense, God does have different lessons, different experiences. It doesn't change our destination. It doesn't change the details and the moral and ethical quality of God, his will, his character, his development of that in us. It's all the same for us. But sometimes the path by which we're going to learn those things about God and become partakers of the character of Christ and import them in our lives, I might have a harder head than you do, and so the Lord has to come knocking on my skull more often than he does you. And so my experiences, my trail, is a little more difficult than yours. That could be the case. So way, ways, path, paths. And you'll find through Proverbs that you have both of them lined up. And had we the time, I'd take you there right now. I want to go a little further. I at least want to finish this and add on just a little bit more. And then, as it now refers in its metaphoric, spiritual, ethical, moral sense, we're talking about the way that God wants us to be. We're actually talking about the actions and behavior of men. And the typical contrast will be between the way of the righteous and the way of the wicked. We'll find a few other apt descriptions of the persons that are involved here, but they fall into two moral categories, the righteous or the wicked. And the way or the ways. But how this path lines up is demonstrative of the God who gave us the map. And so being on this road means developing the character of Christ and making right decisions, righteous decisions, moral decisions based on the character of God. But there can be a multitude of those, and so your GPS directions may tell you follow this far, bear off to the right. When you come to a little Y there, bear to the right. But you're going to the same place. But for other people, there may be a few variations in some of the lessons and the path through life, but we're all going to in the same direction, and the same destination will be there. And so occasionally this then means, Derek means manner or custom, conduct, behavior, way of living, and the big words that define that are life or death or darkness, light or darkness. So we know there's a huge contrast. And I just make a really simple appeal that we ought not even have to repeat, and yet all of us need repetition, lest we forget. We are on a journey from earth to heaven. And there are a lot of pitfalls, a lot of places where we could stumble and fall into a pit, a lot of detours, a lot of distractions, a lot of signs that somebody came and twisted around and you couldn't read it very well and you went down this way. It's the wrong road. And then appeals in Proverbs, turn around, go back quickly, right now. Don't keep going down that road. Once you know that's the wrong way to go, don't delay. Get turned around right now before it's too late. So this word, it's kind of interesting, but I just bring in, when you have the Hebrew language and you have a lot of cognate languages, and the study of the Ugaritic language, I have to tell you, is not probably first shelf thing you got to have to go in ministry, but back in seminary, that was an offered course, and taking both Aramaic, part of the Bible is in Aramaic, it's a first cousin to Hebrew, but even Ugaritic. And so we had to learn Ugaritic grammar and Ugaritic vocabulary and translate passages. We learned a whole lot about the Canaanite pantheon of gods, Baal and others, because all this Ugaritic literature. We also realized how close the Ugaritic language is to the Hebrew language. And so they have words and roots that are exactly parallel to Hebrew. And as you study those words, you come to terms with, okay, now I think I understand the Hebrew a little better, because in that whole area of the world, they had this word derek, and it covered this material. So in the Ugaritic language, this word means dominion or thrones of dominion. And we were talking about that. The high places, the power, the supremacy, having the upper hand, winning the victory, being dominant. And whether this context in Ugaritic or Hebrew would be talking about crushing those thrones and dominions and powers, but it's this word. Or whether it's talking about God has all power. He dominates. He will crush the enemy. He will tread that down like grapes in a wine press. But that idea of supremacy and height is always there. So treading is important. Now let me take you back to Proverbs, and we'll just spend the last couple of moments here. Of the 75 times in Proverbs, we could go through every verse there and point out. I will mention that as you go through these 75 occurrences, it isn't only the word for way, almost always. But on an occasion, it's translated journey. If you had the NASB and you looked in chapter 7, verse 19, you'd find journey. And that actually is derek. But you wouldn't know that from reading journey. You'd think that must be a different Hebrew word, but it actually is the same word. In chapter 12, verse 28, it's translated in the NASB pathway. It's translated conduct in chapter 19 and road in chapter 26. And actually 3 times the word isn't even translated. It's kind of amalgamated with some context, and they don't even use the word for road or way or path or journey. They just translate it in such a way that's sort of implied, but they never use a word that means road, path, way, journey, or anything like that. But just to get a little context, let's look at just 2 or 3 verses. Proverbs 131. Proverbs 131. And as you read this now, we're not in the definition part. We've talked about that quite a bit. We're not in the destination part. We're in the in-between. This is while we're on this journey. And as you look around, and in some cases smell the roses, enjoy the view, relax, and just really delight in the presence of God as you walk along this journey. But there are other lessons to learn, other observations to make. Proverbs 131, so they shall eat of the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own devices. So help me understand now, the fruit of their own way suggests what about traveling on this road, whatever road it is? There are consequences. It's as simple as that. What was that? Reaping and sowing. So they're going to eat the fruit of this path. If you're on this path, and if it's through a vineyard and there are grapes, don't expect to find spinach. This is not a farm with rows and rows of spinach. This is a vineyard. So this path, but there's fruit, which is the destination and the journey. And so, but the fruit, and will it be life or will it be death? Will it be light or will it be darkness? Because there are accompanying circumstances and there are consequences. Look in. Yes. That's right. So again, you locate words that are put in company there, and each one will shed light and help to restrict or enlarge the sense of the other word. Look in Proverbs 2, verse 12. We were already here before, but I just remind you of this. If you're looking for an association and accompaniment, we can expand on the meaning of the first one by the second one. So Proverbs 2:12 is talking about guarding our path and following the right path to deliver you from the way of evil. Now we could easily say it's not the evil, it's just evil, or we could just reverse the word. That would be perfectly appropriate. This genitive adjectival sense of evil, to deliver you from the evil way. So that's telling you what this way is like, what it ends up in, what it is along the way, to deliver you from the evil way. Translated the way of evil, that's fine. But now look at the next phrase, from the man who speaks perverse things. So now you have a rather narrow sense that you have a companion on this journey, and he's telling you crooked things. He's deceitful, he's lying, he's misleading, And so you don't want to go on that road, because the man that walks that road, the man with whom you travel on that road, is not going to steer you straight. He's going to say awful things and filthy things and erroneous things and immoral things, and you don't want to go down that road, because that's the company you keep on that road. That's who travels that road. The people who walk that road are like that. So this is a warning to us there. You remember, and I'll just read this because you know this verse, in all your ways, Proverbs 3:6, acknowledge him in all your ways. Whereas other places it's way. So this is again where you have the plural or the singular, in all your ways. So that means that it's not just categoric in all your path or in all your journey, your whole life. Acknowledge him. It's more particular, filled with more finesse than that. There are a lot of different decisions, choices, experiences, needs that we have in our life for God to intervene and give us the wisdom we need. Now, you know, I can say this with Kathy's situation. Wow, as ill as she was for days and days and days, I can tell you that hour by hour sometimes something is changing. And I can also tell you that that's the time when we who have no wisdom, don't know where to turn, have no recourse, the only thing to do is ask God for wisdom and to claim the promise of the New Testament, that the one who lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, because he gives liberally. And the King James has a word, and he does not upbraid anyone. And that word means he doesn't resent what you're doing and make you feel foolish for having to ask. He invites you to ask. He tells you to come, and you lack wisdom, and you say, Lord, I don't know which way to turn. I don't know what to do. And I can say there were several instances through the night or late in the day or earlier than that where it's nip and tuck. And the last thing I wanted to do is take her back down to the hospital. But there were certain points in this journey when I wasn't sure what else can I do, because it got to that particular level. And so we ask God for wisdom, and then in his grace, somehow things plateau and then begin to reverse. But wow, how is that even achievable? Because we asked God for wisdom, and he gave us just enough insight to say, before we go to the hospital, we're going to try this right here. And lo and behold, wow, and I'm not even going to go into detail as to what steps we took that were just astounding, how it curtailed and began to reverse. And that was this, now we're talking days and days, several weeks. And so I'm leaving here in 1 minute. I have to make a mad dash home because I'm bringing a guest today. We're going to stop here, pick up. I want to continue a little more, but the other couple of words. And so we're going to forge ahead. We will not be in this territory too long, but a little bit more. So thank you for going down this path with us.